Sarah Vedler, and I'm so excited today to share with you how to create a quilted in the hoop panel that will go into one of these gorgeous Happy baskets. The Popup baskets are from the Happy collection, and I'm so excited about them. They're so much fun to make. They come in 3 different sizes, and each size has 2 different variations that you can make. The technique is the same regardless of the size of the basket. I'm going to show you how to make a panel for this hoop. As I said before, the technique is the same regardless of the size of the panel. So let's get started. First of all, let's take a look at the things that you're going to need. Now this basket has the cream backgrounds and the pink borders on the top and the bottom. I decided to make the twin today, so the one that I'm making today has pink on the background and it's going to have a cream border around it. We have a piece of background fabric. We have a piece of batting that's the same size. Now my favorite batting to use is Quilters Dream Orient. It's a beautiful, lightweight, low loft, i.e. really thin batting that gives you some great texture for quilting in the hoop. I've got my pre-cut applique shapes, fusible webbing on the back of them. Now I cut my applique shapes using the Silhouette Cameo, so my favorite fusible webbing to use with that machine is Heat and Bond Lite. Gives me a really crisp, clean cut to all of my applique shapes. I've got a piece of stabilizer that's going to go into my mega hoop, and the stabilizer is OESD Ultra Clean and Tear. It's a medium weight tearaway stabilizer, so I can get rid of this stabilizer from around the outside of my project. I've also got some Scotch tape, and that's going to hold my background fabric onto the stabilizer in the hoop. I've got my thread. My favorite to use for all of my embroidery projects is AURIfil Cotton Mako 50 weight, but you can use any embroidery thread, whichever one is your favorite. I also have bobbin thread. The one that I like to use is Superior Bottom Line Tan. I find that that works perfectly well with any color of thread on the top, possibly with the exception of black thread on black fabric, in which case I would use black bobbin thread, and white thread on white fabric, I would put white thread in the bobbin. I also have a little pair of scissors, always handy for trimming the threads when I'm changing colors on my embroidery machine. I almost forgot, I'm going to show you how I use double-sided Scotch tape to make sure that the stabilizer is put into my hoop correctly and it stays exactly where I need it to stay. And I have my Top Flite sealing iron, which I'm going to use to fuse the applique shapes onto the background fabric. Now any iron will do as long as it fits into your hoop. I love this mini sealing iron for fusing my applique shapes because it has a nice solid base on the back, so it has even heat. It's nice and small, so I can get into all of the tiny nooks and crannies of my applique shapes, as well as this really nice sharp point, which helps a lot. And it gets really nice and hot, so I can be confident that my applique shapes are fused really well. The first thing that we're going to do is put the stabilizer into the hoop. Now the mega hoop for the Bonina embroidery machines is a really long, skinny hoop, and if you were to drop it on the floor, everything might fall out. Not usually very likely, but I have seen it happen before. I have a little trick that makes it so that if the hoop does drop out, you don't lose everything that you've been busy working on because your stabilizer is actually stuck to the hoop. Let me show you how that works. I have my hoop here. I'm going to loosen the outer hoop ever so slightly, just enough so that I can push the inside hoop out. Then I'm going to turn the inside hoop upside down. Let's just move that bit out of the way for now. And I'm going to put some double-sided Scotch tape on both sides of the hoop, just in the center. And there's a nice solid bit on this particular hoop right here and here, so the Scotch tape will actually hold. And then I'm also going to put actually a short piece on either end of the hoop. And again, there's a little bit of hoop that sticks out here that's just big enough to put a piece of Scotch tape on. Now I'm going to, let's see, put my piece of stabilizer, and I'm going to hold it flat, and I'm going to press the hoop right down onto the stabilizer. So I'm going to give it a really good press at the ends and the sides where I know I have put the Scotch tape. Now I'm going to bring the outer hoop back in, and I'm going to make sure that I have the arrows lined up on the inside and the outside. I know that this is the bottom. It should match up with that. And you can see that my stabilizer is really nice and stuck onto the hoop. And so I can just press one end in and then come down to the other end and use the heel of my hand. And I'm doing this sideways. I usually do it lengthways. Flip it around here. There, you can push the end in, and there is no need to do any more tightening on that hoop. And it's nice and tight and taut in the hoop. Now I've got this stabilizer in my hoop, I'm ready to go over to the embroidery machine. Now I've already loaded the design into the machine, so I'm going to tell the machine that I'm ready to stitch. It's going to move the free arm into its place, and now I can load the hoop. The machine is recognizing that I've loaded the hoop, and I can just confirm that, and now everything is ready and I can start stitching. I've got pink thread on here. The first thing that is going to stitch out is a placement line, and that's going to stitch directly onto the stabilizer that I've put into the hoop, and it's going to show me exactly where to put the background fabric. Now I said I've got pink thread in. Nobody's ever going to see this particular thread that's stitching out right now. The reason I've got the pink in is because I know that that's the first color that I will need when I do real stitching that everybody is going to see. As long as I can see it on the stabilizer, I'm good to go. So let's get started with this back placement line. So the placement line is going to show me exactly where to put my background fabric, and that means that I can have a piece of background fabric that is the right size with a little bit, maybe an inch of extra around. I don't need a huge piece of background fabric so that I can kind of guess where it needs to go and then trim a lot of it away. I like my fabric to go into my project, so I use the placement lines so that I can use the smallest piece of background fabric that's going to work for my project. So now we've got the placement line stitched, I'm going to remove the hoop from the machine, and we're going to put the background fabric in its place. Here's the placement line that I've just stitched directly onto the stabilizer in the hoop. I'm going to take my piece of batting and I'm going to center the batting over the placement line in the hoop. Now I'm going to fold it back this way so that I can see I'm an equal distance above and below the placement line, and I'm going to fold it up this way so that I can make sure that I'm centered this way. So I'm going to bring it just a tiny bit that way. So now my batting is totally centered on the stabilizer in the hoop. Now I can bring my background fabric and position that right on top of the batting. And now I'm going to use some of my Scotch tape with a piece along the top to hold the background fabric and the batting in place on the hoop. So, and then we're going to put a piece down here on the bottom. Now I'm going to take this back to the embroidery machine and we're going to stitch out color number 2. I've got my hoop back on the machine and I'm ready to stitch color number 2. Now this starts out as a basting line that's going to hold the background fabric and the batting securely in the hoop. And I've got my finger here just so that I don't, or the machine doesn't tug the batting at all. Now we're going to get going again. So the placement line or the basing line is going to hold everything securely in the hoop, and then it's going to go straight into stitching the quilting. Now before we do that, I'm just going to adjust my tension. The default tension on my Bernina 880 is 2.75. When I'm doing quilting in the hoop, I like to take it down to 2.25, and that gives me a really nice quilting stitch. So now I'm going to leave this as about 12 minutes of stitching that it's going to do, and I will be back when it's finished. The quilting's all done in color number 2, and I'm ready to stitch color number 3. Now I've changed the thread color to a yellow this time because color number 3 is going to stitch a placement line to show me where to put the applique shapes. I want to make sure that the placement line is clearly distinguishable from the quilting that has been done on the background, hence having a thread stop and changing the color of the thread that I'm going to use. So let's get this stitched out. Now I have a placement line. I'm going to take the hoop off the machine and over to my ironing board, and I'm going to fuse the applique shapes in place. I have my hoop off the machine and on the ironing board, and I have 4 applique shapes lined up and ready to go into the 4 placement lines that was stitched out in color number 3. First of all, I want to make sure that I've got all the backing paper off my applique shapes. It's really easy to do that. If you fold over, and it will just slip right off. So again, just fold over a little corner and the backing paper will peel right off. That one is nearly off anyway. Here we go with the last one. Now I'm going to grab my mini sealing iron, which is nice and hot, and I'm going to place the applique shapes one by one exactly in the placement line. And I'm going to use just the point of my mini iron here. I want to keep the iron off the quilting as much as possible so that I don't flatten it. That's one of the benefits of having this small sealing iron rather than using a regular iron. Even though the regular iron might fit into my hoop, it's going to pretty much squash all of the beautiful quilting that I've just done, and I will lose a lot of the gorgeous texture that is created. This one, I want to make sure I've got the point in down here and also the 2 points up at the top. And you can see I'm going fairly slowly here, making sure that my applique shapes are perfectly in place. If you've cut using the templates provided with the design collection or using the SVG files that are provided, then you will find that the applique shapes are a perfect fit for the placement line. All done fusing this set of applique shapes in place. There's one more applique shape that needs to go in, the big V. I'm going to go back to my embroidery machine, stitch out color number 4, which will give me the placement line so that I can position that last applique shape perfectly in place. Now that the applique shapes are all fused perfectly into place, I'm going to take the hoop back to the machine and finish stitching the design. The design's all finished stitching, so let's take the hoop off the machine. Now we can take everything out of the hoop. Let's release the screw down here, pop it out. Now, because we used the double-sided Scotch tape, the stabilizer is still stuck to the hoop, And usually you can tear the stabilizer away and the Scotch tape will stay stuck onto your hoop so that you can reuse it. Let's pop the hoop out to the side here, and I'm going to remove this piece of tape from the top and the bottom that was holding everything in place on the stabilizer. I'm going to turn it over to the back side, and I'm going to tear away the stabilizer from around the outside of the basting line. And I want to make that as neat as possible, so I fold and put a crease in the stabilizer, and then usually it tears away really cleanly. There's the last side. That's a little bit down there, got stuck. So now I have a finished piece. I've got batting on the back, I've got the stabilizer on the back, and everything is looking beautiful from the front. Now it's time to trim the panel so that it's ready to put into the basket. I have my panel laid out on my cutting mat, and I've smoothed it so that it's all nice and square. Now I'm making what is called the large pop-up basket here. I know it was the medium-sized one when you had the three of them together, but it's actually called the large pop-up, and I need to trim this panel so that it is 6 1/8 of an inch wide and 11.5 inches tall. So first of all, I'm going to trim the width, and I'm going to find the halfway point using some of the points on the design. So I have a nice point down here, I have a nice point up here, and at 6 1/8 inches wide, I want to have the halfway point at 3 1/16 of an inch. Now that is not such a nice number, but just off the side of 3 inches is good. And as long as it's straight, and you can use the stitching lines along the top and the bottom to ensure that you're actually cutting this thing straight. I've got that one side nicely lined up, so I'm going to cut that. Now I'm going to turn this around, and the next cut's easy because I can just measure 1 or 6 1/8 of an inch over here. I'm going to hold that in place and cut down there. Now I want to measure 11.5 inches. As long as they're all the same, it really doesn't matter exactly what you use for your alignment line. I am going to go with the top of the quilting, and I have the top of the quilting on the 10.5 inch mark up here. So there's going to be a full inch up here, and I have 1 1/8 inches down at the bottom from the bottom of the quilting line. So I am going to use that as my line. So I trimmed the bottom first. Now I'm going to turn it and measure 11.5 inches from the bottom. So now I have my perfectly trimmed panel. I'm going to go away and make 5 more of these. I need a total of 6 to go into the basket. And be sure to watch my next video, which will tell you everything that you need to know about how to put the basket together.